My name is Ishan Misra, and today I'll talk to you about training machine learning models without human supervision. One of the biggest success stories in AI has been the rise of supervised learning. Now, most of the AI applications that you've interacted with, say for image search, image tagging, or recognizing a particular object on your phone, these applications typically have been powered by a supervised AI model. So let's look at how to train a supervised AI model. We first start by collecting a set of input label pairs. So let's say we're interested in creating an image recognition model. So given an input image, this model is going to predict the prominent object in that particular image. So we'll start by collecting a set of images, and then we'll ask human annotators to label that particular image. So in the first image, we have an annotation or a label given by a human saying that this image contains a tree. For another one, we'll get a dog. For another one, we'll get a banana. And then we essentially have a large set of input and label pairs. Once we get these input label pairs, we use them to train a machine learning model. So we start by feeding this input image into a model, and the model makes a bunch of predictions of what it thinks are possible objects in this image. So it will say that with certain degree of confidence that there's a dog in the image, there's a tree, there's a banana, and so on. In this case, the model unfortunately thinks that this image contains a banana because it produces a very strong confidence score for the class banana. So thankfully, we have a label, which is tree. And so we can tell the model that it's wrong. And now this model will update its predictions such that the next time it encounters this image, it will produce a much more confident prediction for this class tree. And it will produce less confidence for these unrelated concepts, dog and banana. Now, supervised learning has been super successful. You can essentially repeat this paradigm by collecting input label pairs for your particular choice task. So you can do this for speech recognition, you can do this for NLP tasks, and so on. The biggest bottleneck, of course, is that these models need lots of input label pairs. A typical image recognition model needs millions or billions of these input label pairs to actually achieve a good amount of accuracy on these tasks. So if you were to be a little bit cynical, and if you were to take a kind of a long-term perspective on this, supervised learning is nothing but spoon feeding. We have a human who is creating a bunch of supervision by labeling images, by labeling some sentences, and we are spoon feeding this supervision to a machine learning model. And this machine learning model, after being spoon fed a bunch of the supervision, can then do that particular task. But it can only do that particular task. And so clearly, supervised learning is not really going to create very general AI models. Let's look at three sort of very important challenges to address in supervised learning. The first challenge is that labeling just cannot scale. While we can label small amounts of data, it's not going to scale to the amount of data or the amount of concepts that we're really interested in. So as an example, the ImageNet dataset, which is really widely used in computer vision and machine learning, consists of 14 million images. And it has about 22,000 concepts, and it took 22 human years to label these images. Now, if we were to talk about all the images on the internet, there are more than 1 trillion images. And if we are interested in concepts, just these concepts that contain these 22,000 objects, then we'll take a very, very long time to annotate these entire trillions of images. If we move beyond web images to web videos or to other types of data, then it's really going to be harder and harder to label all the types of concepts that we're interested in. Moving to different domains, like medical imaging, requires specialists to label these images. We can't really outsource them to any random person. So in this case, because we are really bottlenecked by the number of people and the specialists who can annotate these annotations, we're going to have another bottleneck in annotation. The second challenge is that even if we manage to collect these labels, our dataset gathering or our labeling process themselves might have some kind of bias, and that bias creeps into these supervised models that we train. So in 2019, we ran a study by taking a bunch of commercial supervised image recognition models that were open to the public, and we just tried to figure out if they work very well on different types of images. So in this slide, we're looking at images of three concepts: soap, spices, and toothpaste. And in the top row, we have images coming from Nepal, Philippines, and Burundi. In the bottom row, we have images for the same concepts, but in this case, they come from the UK and the US. What we observe is that the prediction for the AI models is really good and it's correct for the images coming from the UK or from the US, and it's wrong for all the images in the top row. And when we investigated this phenomenon further and quantitatively measured it for images coming from different parts of the world, we found that the AI models have a stronger accuracy for images coming from North America and Europe than for images coming from Africa, South America, or Asia. And this is primarily because most commercial AI models are trained on images coming from North America or Europe, and so they don't work for images coming from different parts of the world. And the second thing we found is that the accuracy of these AI models seems to be correlated with the income of the household where this picture was taken. So if you have a household income of, say, which is lower, then the accuracy is going to be lower. Whereas if you have an image coming from a household with a higher income, then the accuracy is going to be higher. And moving forward, we would not want our AI models to have these types of biases, even if we do somehow get them through the data collection or the labeling process. The third challenge for supervised models is that after we spoon feed them a bunch of supervision for a bunch of different tasks, these models really do not graduate to any other tasks. They can only do the exact task that we trained them to do. So if we trained a model on billions of images of a pineapple, and this model can never recognize pineapple given a 3D model of a pineapple. Although the 3D model in this case really does look like a pineapple. So the model should really be able to recognize it. But our current supervised models just do not do this well. So in my research, I've been looking at self-supervised learning as a way to address these three main challenges with supervised AI models. So what is self-supervised learning? In self-supervised learning, we replace the labels that are needed to train an AI model by creating this automatic labeling process. So we take our input data and we split it up into two chunks: an observed part of the data and a hidden part of the data. And then we set up a prediction problem to go from the observed part of the data and predict these hidden data or some property of this particular hidden data. And in this case, because we've set up this automatically labeled process, we are not really relying on human supervision to do this. So let's look at an example. In the case of NLP, we can take an input sentence, like a cat jumped over the fence, and then we can blank out a particular word and make that the label. So in this case, the input to the model becomes a blank jumped over the fence, and the model is now going to predict that particular label, which is going to be cat. And so we constructed this entire input and label from the data itself without using any human annotation, because we can just blank out any random word. We can do the same thing for images. For example, we can just take, say, the top left corner of an image and make that the input and ask the model to predict what the bottom right corner of this image will look like. And once again, we've created this task without using any human annotation. Now, in my research, we've created these self-supervised models for visual data, mainly images, videos, and 3D. And we found very surprising and good properties of these models. These self-supervised models work well for images coming from different parts of the world. So again, this is the dataset that I talked about earlier. We have images coming from different parts of the world, and we're looking at the accuracy of the AI model. The self-supervised models actually produce good predictions for images coming from different parts of the world. And so they seem to be more robust and more fair for these different images from different parts. They also seem to be much more fair than supervised models when we're looking at their predictions across different attributes like gender, race, geography, and economical aspects of the images. These self-supervised models are also more fair when we're looking at qualitative examples. So in this case, we have spices and stuff from different parts of the world, and the supervised model produces very weird predictions, whereas the self-supervised model is much better at recognizing the concepts in these images. We've also found that self-supervised models can actually graduate beyond the task that they were trained to do. So our self-supervised models can actually discover objects. In this case, we're finding that the self-supervised model can actually discover this particular dog in the video without ever being trained to discover this dog. So it automatically discovers the pixels that belong to these dogs, discovers the objects. So now let's look at this self-supervised learning in more detail for computer vision. The two main concepts that are used to train these self-supervised models are multi-view invariance and grouping. In multi-view invariance, we've looked basically at the fact that when we're recognizing a tree, we should be able to recognize the tree no matter the time of the day, no matter the season, no matter whether you've zoomed into the image or zoomed out of the image. So basically, no matter your viewing point, you should be able to recognize that particular tree. And in grouping, we are basically trying to learn a model that can group together different types of trees and recognize that they're similar or dissimilar in various different ways. So it should be able to say that all 4 of these images are trees, and whereas one of them actually has red leaves, the others don't have red leaves, and so on. And the common technique for self-supervised learning in vision has basically been to take an input image and compute some image edits of it. So in this case, we take this image, we can make it darker, we can zoom into a different part of it, and we really train our model such that its predictions should be unaffected by whatever image edits that we've applied to it. And so this basically becomes the label or the supervision that we're going to use. In my research, I've used this common technique to learn invariant features by using different types of techniques through a similarity maximization objective, through a redundancy reduction objective. And in my series of work, we've basically found that this common principle seems to work really well for different types of models, different types of data, and really produces strong results for a bunch of different cases. So I'll just talk about one of these techniques called Barlow Twins because it's pretty easy to explain. Barlow Twins is a way to learn self-supervised features from the data, and it was really inspired by neuroscience. We particularly looked at Horace Barlow's efficient coding hypothesis. Now, the idea in this case is pretty simple because the neurons in a brain communicate basically using spiking codes. And there's limited amount of real estate in the human brain. There's limited amount of physical space. There's limited amount of power that the neurons can use, the energy that they consume. And so the spiking codes that they use to communicate with one another should be pretty efficient. And in this case, they should reduce redundancy so that we can communicate very easily. Because if we don't, then we're not making full use of the limited real estate that we have in the brain. So we take this efficient or redundancy reduction idea and we apply it to learning good image representations. So in Barlow Twins, we take the data, we compute 2 image edits of this particular data, and then we feed it to a model and we ask the model that the predictions that it will make for both of these image edits should have minimum amount of redundancy. And to do that, we take these predictions, so in this case, these might be 3-dimensional predictions, we compute their cross correlation, and then we say that this cross correlation should be as close to an identity matrix as possible. And so now, by just having this loss to train the model, we can update the model such that the next time it sees both of these inputs, the predictions that it's making on both of these inputs have actually minimized their redundancy. And so the final model that we get out of this can actually recognize this tree under different viewpoints, whether it's dark, whether it's zoomed in, whether it's cropped differently. And it can also group together different trees. So it can recognize the fact that a coconut tree and this particular tree are actually similar. I'll just talk about a few other key results of self-supervised learning across images, videos, and 3D. In our work, published since 2019, we've consistently demonstrated that self-supervised models can outperform supervised models on a variety of different image tasks. And I'm talking about these three particular tasks of detection, segmentation, and classification, which are really considered cornerstone or sort of workhorse tasks in computer vision. So for object detection, the goal is to detect an object and draw a bounding box or a box around it. In image segmentation, the idea is to segment pixels belonging to objects. And in image classification, the idea is to recognize predominant objects or scenes or concepts in that particular image. And in all three of these tasks, self-supervised models actually outperform supervised models. We've also found that particularly for images, we can now train models with 100 times fewer labels than we could in 2016 and actually get the same performance. We've scaled these models to train on billions of internet images without using any supervised data, any human labels, and we found that the resulting self-supervised models work really well. So one of these models, called SEER, actually outperforms supervised models on a variety of different computer vision benchmarks. Now let's look at other properties of these models for images. As I talked about earlier, self-supervised models actually enable discovery. So in our work called Dino, we found that these models can segment out pixels belonging to different objects in an image automatically. So on the bottom left, we find that this model can separate out the clock tower, the flag, the building, and so on. In the top right, we find that this model can actually segment out the sandwiches, the sauce, the container with the sauce, and so on. And all of this happens automatically. This model was not trained to do this. We've also used audio as a source of supervision for video. In this case, we train self-supervised models to match the audio coming from a video. So if you have the audio of a person playing a guitar, we want to match that and not match the audio of a person playing a different instrument. And now these models that we train actually can localize the sound coming in videos. So they can figure out if there's a particular audio that's playing, which pixels are most likely going to be responsible for this particular sound. We've also used these self-supervised techniques on 3D data and found that we can train self-supervised models that outperform supervised models while using 2 times fewer labels. Now moving to the future, I've been looking at general models. These models that can perform tasks that they were really not trained to do, and they can learn from multiple different types of data and supervision, not just look at images or videos or 3D in isolation. Looking at all of these, say, 3 different modalities in isolation has been the predominant paradigm in machine learning and computer vision. So if we want to train a model for images, we train a separate model. When we want to train a model for video, we train a separate model. For 3D, it's a separate model, and so on. Now, as I talked about earlier, a big problem with this is that if you want to recognize a pineapple in 3D, you really need 3D supervision. If you had billions of labeled images of a pineapple, you would not recognize 3D images of a pineapple. So in this year, we presented a work called Omnivore, which learns a single model that can ingest different types of modalities. This universal omnivorous model eats together images, videos, and single view 3D to learn a single model and a single representation of the world. So in particular, Omnivore looks at images, videos, and 3D, and we train a single model that will combine together the information from all of these 3 different types of data. So it will learn about textures, about colors from images, it will learn about motion from video, and it will learn about shape and 3D structure from single view 3D, all into a single model. This Omnivore model outperforms specialist AI models on a variety of different tasks for images, videos, and 3D. And we observe that as we increase the capacity or the size of the AI model that we're training, this omnivorous model actually starts doing better and better. The other interesting property was that these omnivorous models actually have an emergent behavior. So we can take this representation and we can retrieve together now pineapples We can recognize these pineapples across depth, across single view 3D, across video, although we never trained on pineapples in 3D. We've also shown that these Omnivore models can be trained without supervision, purely on self-supervised data, and now these self-supervised Omnivore models outperform self-supervised video-only or image models. Finally, we've used our techniques, these general modeling techniques, to create detection models that can detect 20,000 or more classes. And this detection model was not trained on human supervision, box supervision for these particular classes. And just by using general modeling techniques, we can actually have it detect a variety of different classes. Thanks so much for listening to me.